All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Plateau's Early Bird Special presented by Plateau's sister company, Braun Gresham. This is a 15-minute presentation, and we will be covering asset protection considerations for landowners. This is presented by Braun Gresham attorneys Joanne Hatton and David Braun. Joanne has been involved in hundreds of real estate transactions and has helped clients solve a wide variety of real estate-related issues. She has experience organizing family-limited partnerships for managing large swaths of land, planning family and business structures for purposes of succession, solving easement and construction issues, resolving ownership disputes, and assisting clients in tax disputes with the Texas Comptroller and the IRS. Joanne's wide range of experience brings a unique perspective to helping her clients find innovative and practical solutions to their various real estate issues. And David's clients are landowners interested in conserving the rural character of their land. He helps them create and protect sustainable value in their land. David provides legal counsel, practical advice, and innovative solutions in estate planning, mitigation banking, and conservation development. David is also the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Plateau Land and Wildlife Management, which provides ecological services and property tax consulting and works hand in hand with Braun Gresham to meet client goals for their land. Because we have limited time for this presentation and we'll be starting Plateau's property tax presentation at 6 p.m., we ask that if you have any follow-up questions regarding asset protection, you either email Joanne directly, and I will be providing her contact information here at the end, or feel free to email myself. You should have received a follow-up email whenever you registered for this webinar. So without further ado, Joanne, please feel free to take it away.
Thank you very much, Avalon. I'm going to go ahead and David will chime in where he has something to add. I wanted to start out by saying that Braun Gresham is a close to 20-year-old law firm that devotes itself to owners of rural land. And over here at Braun Gresham, we think about your land and landowners every day. It's what we do. And in working with those landowners, we've seen so many situations where landowners could have avoided problems by anticipating and carefully managing their risk. And today we're going to talk about some of the tools that are available to landowners to manage their recreational properties and to protect their other assets. And you know, Texans love their land. It's very special to them. And land is not like other assets. It can be the most valued and the most valuable asset a family owns. Unlike other types of assets, such as stocks or bank accounts, recreational land often comes with inherent dangers. And even with the best of intentions, landowners can't always protect their guests or their family members or their friends from making mistakes or getting hurt on their land. And so in our discussion today, we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of activities that can cause liability and the steps landowners might take to help to minimize that risk. At Braun Gresham, we think of asset protection as a series of layers. If you could go to the next slide. As a series of layers that are chosen for your particular situation and your particular budget. While there are a number of tools available, few people need all the available layers of protection. Some tools are easy and quick and inexpensive, and some are more complicated but necessary for people in certain financial situations. And over here at Braun Gresham, we look at each situation individually, and we try to help landowners to decide how many layers of protection they need. It's possible and practical in many situations to set up the layers of protection in steps taken over time so that the most important layers are in place And then landowners can implement other layers of their plan as their risk of liability grows. So what are we protecting against? There are two areas where liability tends to occur. The first is an accident on the land itself. Texans use their land for hunting, swimming, horseback riding, riding all-terrain vehicles, and they tend to have a lot of fun on their land, and with that fun comes some risk. All these things have risk, and people who do them all the time know that there are risks, but the biggest risk we see is when people invite their family and friends who aren't familiar with those kinds of activities, maybe they're friends from the city, to come out and visit with them. And a lot of times people will be driving ATVs or be handed guns and not be able to not know how to use them. And they haven't been instructed on safety protocols. And that presents a risk to the recreational landowner. The second area where we see liability threaten a family's recreational land is when there is a personal or business financial setback, events unrelated to the land, things such as divorce, a business bankruptcy, medical emergencies, deaths in the family. And we can help to put up layers of protection around your property so there's less exposure to loss from those kinds of unforeseen events. We won't have time to mention all the layers of protection a landowner or a family might use to protect their recreational land, but here's a few of what we think are the best layers. So first, our business entities. Many Texans own their property in their own name. And while that can be cost efficient and simple, things like LLCs, family limited partnerships, and trusts can be used in different ways to protect your recreational land and your other assets from some of the risks we've mentioned here tonight. And not every family will need or want the expense of setting up or managing a business or a trust, but for the right situation, and many times these can be excellent tools. The second thing we have to protect landowners, and the second tool Texans have, are the statutory limitations on liability. Texas has a number of statutes on the books that limit landowners' liability in the event of an accident or other kind of happening on the land. And there are a few things that landowners must do to qualify for those statutory protections. Over here at Braun Gresham, we can do a quick review of those steps with landowners and look at what they're doing now to be sure they're meeting those statutory requirements in order to take advantage of those protections. Some of the items that might help are having signage on the property warning visitors and guests of dangers that exist on the property, having the right kind and the right amount of insurance coverage. And if you don't meet all the requirements under the simple rules under the statute, you can fall into a spot where you're not protected by the statutes that were enacted by the legislature to protect landowners. So it's important to review those things and make sure you're doing those things that help to protect you under the statutes that are there. The next thing that we can provide is an insurance review. And insurance is the most common tool that people have to protect their assets today. Most people have it on their land anyway as part of their mortgage, but knowing what your insurance policy actually covers and whether you have the right kind of insurance can be very important. Many times people find out after it's too late that their insurance doesn't cover what they thought it did. And sometimes landowners realize after there are accidents on their land that their insurance doesn't cover accidents related to things like hunting or certain types of recreation. So having the right kinds of insurance and the right amount of insurance is very important. The next protection Texans have that we can take a look at is their homestead protection. And Texas has some of the most powerful and the strongest homestead protections in the country. And it is important to know how to take full advantage of those protections. A lot of times people miss out by not taking full advantage of those homestead protections, and they're especially powerful on rural property. The next thing to look at are liability waivers. And a liability waiver is the kind of thing you sign when you send your kid off to camp. And some people think, and David mentioned the other day, that a lot of people think they're not worth much, but that they might be useful, but they are useful in some cases. They're a little tricky, the laws have changed, but we think they still have a place. And a waiver can help in a lot of situations, and it can be useful for other reasons beyond liability. It can help to educate your guests. It can put them on notice that they're about to do a dangerous activity. And so waivers can be helpful. The next thing we would review in a review of asset protection review are liability waivers. I'm sorry, we just did liability waivers. Is your lease agreements. And many rural landowners have leases on their land for hunting, grazing. They have oil and gas leases or wind and solar leases on their property. And within those agreements, there can be a number of indemnity provisions integrated in there to help protect landowners. If those agreements are poorly drafted, they can cause risks to the landowner. And when they're properly drafted, they can protect the landowner. Another thing that's important to watch out for is the classification of employees and independent contractors. It's important to properly classify the people who work on your land for liability and insurance coverage purposes. Misclassifying an employee as an independent contractor can expose landowners to more risk and liability than they otherwise would have had in the event of an accident. And another important thing for landowners to do is to have training, instruction, and other protocols in place to protect their guests and visitors. And if you're the kind of landowner who is very social, who has social groups out to your land, church groups, scouting groups, if you entertain a lot, it's helpful to develop some training and some protocols for your guests to educate them. It's helpful to develop specific training for common activities. If you're going to take people hunting, for instance, it's important to make sure that everybody you're handing a gun to knows how to use it. And those protocols are very helpful. One place we've seen them be very effective is with horses. You know, people who aren't around horses a lot don't know how to behave around them or are surprised by what can happen around those animals. And inspections are also helpful. Landowners have a duty to keep their premises safe when they invite others onto their land. And nobody wants to have a needless accident. And when you're out on your land all the time, you may not notice the inherent dangers that are there. You and your family members, if you're out there all the time, you don't notice maybe any more of those dangers. Sometimes a trained eye helps you see the dangers that are there in a different light. And finally, it's very important to have emergency protocols. You don't want to start looking for the closest hospital that can treat a snake bite after one of your friends, relatives, or guests have already been bitten. So those kinds of things can all be helpful. And again, over at Braun Gresham, we look at every situation individually, and we help landowners to decide how many layers of protection they need to protect themselves based on their individual situation, their personal concerns, and their budget. That's all we have on asset protection for your recreational property today. But Braun Gresham helps landowners in a variety of ways. And if you want to learn more about our services, you might want to consider signing up for our landowner alert system. And it's short, but it can give you some information every couple weeks. Is that right, Avalon?
That's right. It comes out every 2 weeks. And you're welcome to email me to get subscribed, or you can feel free to give us a call. I'm going to go ahead and share our contact information. Since we're a little bit limited on time and I need to stop sharing here, I'll go ahead and chat everybody this contact information as well in case you have any follow-up questions. So thank you so much, Joanne and David. I really appreciate y'all's time tonight. Thank you, everybody that was able to join us for our early bird special.